Girl interrupts judge in court and says 2 words. The judge turns pale. Guilty or not guilty? The judge repeated, his stern voice echoing through the courtroom. Silence hung heavily, the air thick with anticipation. That's when she stood up, a small girl, no older than 9, her timid frame dwarfed by the towering adults around her. She raised her hand slightly, as if she was in a classroom asking a question, but her eyes were locked on the judge. Your Honor. Her voice cracked slightly, but then it steadied. He didn't do it. The room erupted into murmurs, but the judge froze, his eyes narrowing on the child. And how would you know that? He asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and annoyance. The girl hesitated, her small hands clenching at her sides. Then she uttered the 2 words that made the judge turn pale. He's innocent. The courtroom fell silent. The judge's face turned as white as paper, his lips parted slightly, as though he had seen a ghost. He looked at the girl again, then back down at his notes, his hand trembling slightly. Bailiff, he finally said, his voice barely audible. Clear the courtroom. Now. The scene descended into chaos as everyone began filing out, whispering and glancing back at the girl, who stood firm, her eyes now brimming with tears. What could she possibly know that had rattled the judge so completely? It all started 2 months ago in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside of Chicago. The kind of place where neighbors greeted each other on their way to work, children played on sidewalks, and the most exciting thing to happen was the occasional backyard barbecue. That was before the murder. John Anderson was a respected school principal, the type of man who always had a kind word and a warm smile. But one cold October morning, he was found dead in his home, a single gunshot wound to the chest. The town was in shock. How could such a terrible thing happen to someone so beloved? Detectives worked tirelessly, and soon, they had a suspect, 27-year-old Marcus Reed, a part-time mechanic with a troubled past. He had a criminal record, minor offenses, nothing violent, but his fingerprints were found on the gun. It didn't take long for the town to turn against him. People whispered about his temper, his history, his late-night arguments with John Anderson over unpaid repair bills. Marcus swore he was innocent, but few believed him. The evidence seemed overwhelming. A trial date was set, and the entire town waited anxiously for justice to be served. But then there was Emma. Emma Clark was 9 years old, the youngest daughter of one of John Anderson's close friends. She was quiet, observant, and often overlooked. In the weeks following John's death, Emma seemed different, distracted, withdrawn. Her parents assumed it was grief. After all, she had been close to John, who often helped her with school projects and let her borrow books from his extensive library. What they didn't know was that Emma had seen something that night. She didn't mean to. She had only gone outside because she thought she heard her dog barking. Standing in the shadows of her backyard, she saw someone enter John's house. Someone who wasn't Marcus Reed. Emma didn't know what to do. She was just a kid. She wanted to tell her parents, but every time she tried, she choked on the words. Then, when Marcus was arrested, she felt sick. It wasn't fair. He didn't do it. She was sure of that. But who would believe her? A little girl? The police seemed so confident in their case. Even her parents said it was a shame about Marcus, but it was good they had caught the person responsible. The weight of what Emma knew grew heavier each day, and she started to lose sleep, replaying the scene over and over in her mind. She couldn't keep it in any longer. When the trial began, Emma begged her mom to let her come. "I want to see justice for Mr. Anderson," she said. Her mom hesitated, but eventually agreed. Emma sat quietly through the opening statements, her small hands gripping the edge of the bench. She listened as the prosecutor painted Marcus as a cold-blooded killer, and the defense struggled to poke holes in the evidence. When the judge asked for Marcus's plea, Emma felt her heart race. She didn't know what she was going to do. All she knew was that she couldn't let an innocent man be sent to prison for something he didn't do. And that's when she stood up. After the courtroom was cleared, the judge called Emma and her parents into his chambers. His face was still pale, and his hands trembled as he poured himself a glass of water. "Young lady," he said, his voice softer now, "I need you to tell me everything you know." Emma glanced at her parents, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. She took a deep breath and began to speak. She described the figure she had seen that night, the way they moved, the way they hurried into John's house. She told him it wasn't Marcus, that the person was taller, thinner, and wearing a dark jacket. The judge listened intently, his face unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed heavily. "This complicates things," he muttered. "What does this mean?" Emma's mother asked, her voice shaking. "Is my daughter in danger?" The judge didn't answer. Instead, he picked up the phone and made a call. "We need to reopen the investigation," he said firmly, "and get extra security for this family." As the night wore on, Emma's words began to unravel everything. Evidence that had seemed so solid was suddenly full of holes. Witnesses were re-interviewed. The judge's sudden shift in demeanor raised questions among those involved in the case. But Emma had no idea that her simple act of courage had set off a chain of events far more dangerous than she could imagine. The next morning, Emma woke up to the sound of someone tapping on her bedroom window. She froze, her heart pounding. When she pulled back the curtain, her breath caught in her throat. A figure in a dark jacket stood outside, their face obscured by the shadows. And then, they turned and walked away. Emma stared out the window, her hands trembling as she clutched the curtain. The figure disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind only the faint rustle of leaves. She wanted to scream, to call her parents, but her voice was trapped in her throat. She backed away from the window and sat on her bed, pulling her knees to her chest. What if they knew what she had said in court? What if they were here because of that? After a few minutes of silence, Emma mustered the courage to peek through the window again. The yard was empty. She hurried to her parents' room, her small feet barely making a sound on the carpeted floor. "Mom, Dad," she whispered, her voice shaky. "There's someone outside." Her mother stirred, groggy, and sat up. "What are you talking about, sweetheart? Did you have a bad dream?" Emma shook her head vigorously. "I saw someone outside my window." Her father sat up now, rubbing his eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked, his tone concerned but skeptical. "Yes," Emma insisted, her voice rising slightly. "They were wearing a dark jacket. I saw them." Her father grabbed a flashlight and headed to the window. He scanned the yard, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. "Nothing. I don't see anyone," he said after a few moments. Emma's mother joined him at the window. "It's probably just nerves, honey," she said gently, placing a hand on Emma's shoulder. "You've been through a lot these past few days." "I know what I saw," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. Her father sighed. "I'll check outside just to be safe." Emma and her mother watched from the window as her father walked the perimeter of the house. He checked the bushes, the driveway, and even the backyard. After about 10 minutes, he came back inside. "There's no one out there," he said, "but I'll leave the porch light on, and we'll keep the doors locked." Emma nodded, but deep down, she wasn't convinced. That figure wasn't just in her imagination. Someone had been there, and she knew it. The next day at school, Emma felt like she was being watched. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone's eyes were on her, even in the crowded hallways. She kept glancing over her shoulder, but every time she turned around, there was no one there. At lunch, her best friend, Lily, noticed her unease. "What's wrong with you today?" Lily asked, biting into an apple. "You're acting weird." Emma hesitated, then leaned in close. "I think someone's following me." Lily raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? Like a stalker?" Emma shrugged. "I don't know. I saw someone outside my window last night, and now I feel I don't know, like I'm being watched." Lily's eyes widened. "Did you tell your parents?" "Yeah," Emma said, pushing her sandwich around on her plate. "But they think I'm just imagining things." Lily frowned. "Maybe you should tell someone else. Like the police." Emma shook her head. "I don't want to make a big deal out of it. What if I'm wrong? What if you're not?" Lily countered. "You stood up in court and said something huge. What if someone's mad about it?" Emma's stomach turned at the thought. She didn't want to admit it, but Lily had a point. What if her words in court had put her in danger? That evening, as Emma walked home from school, she felt the same uneasy sensation she'd had all day. The streets were quiet, the sun casting long shadows over the pavement. She glanced behind her every few steps, but no one seemed to be there. She was only a block away from her house when she heard it, a soft rustling sound, like someone stepping on dry leaves. She stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding. "Hello?" she called out, her voice shaky. "Is someone there?" No answer. She quickened her pace, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. The sound of footsteps behind her grew louder. She broke into a run, her legs pumping as fast as they could. She didn't dare look back. When she reached her front door, she fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking so badly that she dropped them. Come on, she muttered, grabbing them off the ground. She finally got the door open and slammed it shut behind her, locking it quickly. Her mother appeared in the hallway, startled. "Emma? What's wrong?" Emma was panting, her face pale. "Someone was following me," she managed to say between breaths. Her mother's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "Yes. I heard them," Emma insisted. Her father joined them, his face serious. "We're calling the police," he said firmly. The police arrived within minutes. They searched the neighborhood but found no sign of anyone suspicious. "We'll keep an eye on the area," one of the officers said. "But it's possible she just got spooked." Emma felt frustrated. Why wouldn't anyone believe her? She knew what she had heard. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind made her jump. She stared at the window, half expecting to see that figure again. Hours passed, and just as she was starting to drift off, she heard it. A soft tapping on the glass. Her eyes flew open. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. Slowly, she turned her head toward the window. And there it was, a face, pale, thin, and expressionless, staring back at her. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The face at the window was expressionless, its hollow eyes staring directly at her. She wanted to scream, but her body was frozen, her voice stuck. The pale figure lifted a single finger to its lips as if to shush her, then tilted its head slightly, as though observing her reaction. Finally, Emma managed to move. She scrambled out of bed and bolted for her parents' room, her footsteps echoing through the quiet house. She burst through the door, startling her parents awake. "There's someone at my window," she gasped, her voice shaking. "They're staring at me." Her father jumped out of bed without hesitation. He grabbed a flashlight and his phone while her mother wrapped an arm around Emma, trying to calm her down. "Stay here," her father said firmly, before disappearing down the hall. Emma and her mother waited, the tension thick in the air. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, they heard the front door open. Her father was outside now, scanning the yard with his flashlight. A few moments later, he returned, his expression grim. "There's no one there," he said, though his tone betrayed his unease. "But the grass outside her window is trampled." Someone was here. Emma's mother tightened her grip on her daughter. "We're calling the police again," she said, her voice firm. When the police arrived, Emma described what she had seen. The officer taking her statement seemed skeptical but polite. "Are you sure it wasn't a shadow, or maybe a reflection?" he asked. "It wasn't a shadow." Emma snapped, frustration bubbling over. "It was a person. I saw their face." The officer nodded, jotting down notes. "We'll increase patrols in the area," he said. "But I suggest keeping your windows locked and maybe getting some additional security measures. Cameras, motion lights, that sort of thing." Emma's father nodded. "I'll handle it," he said, his voice tight with anger. "But you'd better catch whoever this is." As the officers left, Emma felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She wanted to feel safe, but how could she, knowing that someone had been watching her while she slept? The next day, Emma didn't want to go to school. She was too tired, too scared, but her parents insisted. "You need to keep living your life," her mother said gently. "You can't let this stop you." Reluctantly, Emma went, but she spent the day in a fog, barely paying attention in class. At lunch, Lily tried to cheer her up. "Maybe they'll catch the guy soon," she said, her voice hopeful. "Then this will all be over." Emma nodded but didn't say anything. She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. That evening, her father installed a motion-activated camera outside her window. "If they come back, we'll have them on video," he said. It made Emma feel a little better, but not much. As she lay in bed that night, she kept her eyes fixed on the window, watching for any sign of movement. The hours dragged on, and eventually, she drifted into an uneasy sleep. At 2:14 a.m., the motion camera outside Emma's window triggered. The faint click of the lens adjusting echoed in the night as it captured footage of a figure moving toward the house. The person wore the same dark jacket Emma had described, their face partially obscured by a hood. They stopped just short of the window, their head tilting upward to peer inside. Then, they pulled something out of their pocket, a small object that glinted faintly in the moonlight. A knife. The figure moved closer, their hand reaching out to the window pane. But before they could touch it, a spotlight from the neighbor's motion-activated light flooded the yard. The figure froze for a moment, then turned and sprinted into the darkness. The next morning, Emma's father reviewed the footage. His face was pale as he watched the figure approach the window. "This isn't just some prank," he said, his voice tight. "This person means harm." He immediately called the police, who arrived within the hour. The officers reviewed the footage and agreed that the situation was serious. "We'll have a car parked outside your house tonight," one of them said, "and I recommend keeping your daughter in sight at all times." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't like the way the officer had said "your daughter," as though she were the target. That night, Emma lay in bed, unable to sleep. She could hear the faint hum of the police car engine outside, but it did little to calm her nerves. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind made her jump. Around midnight, her father checked on her. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked, sitting on the edge of her bed. Emma nodded. "I guess." He ruffled her hair. "We've got people watching the house. Nothing's going to happen. Try to get some rest." She nodded again, though she didn't believe him. When her father left the room, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Then, around 1:30 a.m., she heard it. A faint tapping sound, not at her window this time, but at the back door. Emma froze. The sound came again, louder this time. Someone was trying to get inside the house. Emma's breath hitched as the tapping at the back door grew more insistent. She wanted to run to her parents' room, but fear rooted her in place. The faint sound of the police car's engine outside reminded her they were there, but would they hear this? The tapping stopped abruptly, plunging the house into silence. Emma strained to listen, every muscle in her body tense. She slid out of bed quietly, her feet barely making a sound on the carpet. She crept to her door and peeked into the hallway. The house was dark and still, but she could feel it. Someone was out there. Then she heard it. The creak of a floorboard downstairs. Emma's heart pounded as she ducked back into her room. Someone was inside. She reached for her phone on her nightstand, her trembling fingers fumbling to unlock it. She dialed 911 and pressed the phone to her ear, whispering as quietly as she could. "There's someone in my house," she said, her voice barely audible. "Please, send help." The operator's calm voice instructed her to stay on the line and keep quiet. "Officers are already stationed outside. Stay where you are." Emma hung up and moved toward her closet, pushing aside her clothes to create a small space to hide. She crouched there, her heart racing, every sound amplified in the stillness. Downstairs, the figure moved with deliberate slowness, careful to avoid making too much noise. They carried a small crowbar, which they had used to pry open the back door. The dim light from the kitchen barely illuminated their face, but their movements were purposeful. They weren't there to steal. They were searching for something. Or someone. The intruder paused at the base of the stairs, tilting their head as though listening. Then, they began to ascend, each step slow and deliberate. Outside, the officers in the patrol car noticed movement on their surveillance monitor. One of them sat up straight, squinting at the screen. "Someone's in the house," he said sharply, reaching for his radio. Emma held her breath as she heard the footsteps approaching her room. They stopped just outside her door. She clamped her hands over her mouth to stifle a whimper. The door creaked open, and a shadow fell across her room. The figure stepped inside, their heavy boots thudding softly against the floor. From her hiding spot, Emma could see the edge of their dark jacket and the glint of the crowbar in their hand. She closed her eyes, willing herself to stay silent. The figure moved around the room, their movements methodical. They opened drawers, flipped through her desk, and even glanced under her bed. Then, they stopped in front of the closet. Emma's heart felt like it might burst out of her chest. She could see the faint outline of their shadow through the slats of the closet door. Slowly, the door began to slide open. Just as the figure reached for the hanging clothes, a loud voice boomed from downstairs. "Police, come out with your hands up." The figure froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. For a moment, Emma thought they might leave, but instead, they turned back toward the closet, their grip on the crowbar tightening. "Police, this is your final warning," the voice shouted again. The intruder hesitated, then abruptly turned and bolted from the room. Emma heard their footsteps pounding down the stairs. Moments later, there was a crash as they broke through the front door and ran outside. The police officers gave chase, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Stop!" one of them yelled, but the figure didn't slow down. They darted through the neighborhood, weaving between houses and jumping fences. Finally, the intruder disappeared into a wooded area at the edge of the street. The officers stopped at the tree line, their breathing heavy. "We lost them," one muttered, frustration evident in his voice. Back at the house, Emma was sitting in the living room with her parents, her hands wrapped around a cup of hot chocolate her mother had made to calm her down. The officers were talking quietly near the front door. "We'll station more patrols in the area," one of them said, "and we'll analyze the footage from your cameras to see if we can identify them." Emma's father nodded, his jaw tight. "This can't keep happening," he said. "We need answers. Why are they targeting my daughter?" The officer hesitated before responding. "It could be related to her testimony in court," he said carefully. "If someone thinks she knows something..." Emma's mother put a protective arm around her. "She's just a child," she said, her voice breaking. "Why would anyone want to hurt her?" The officer didn't answer. He simply nodded grimly and promised to stay in touch. Later that night, Emma lay awake in her parents' bed, her mother's arm draped over her protectively. She stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. The figure hadn't just been looking for her. They had been searching her room. But why? What were they hoping to find? Then it hit her. The books. John Anderson had given her several books from his library, books he had said were special. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it. But now, she wondered if there was something in those books that someone didn't want her to see. Emma's heart raced as she thought about the books hidden under her bed. Could they hold the key to everything that was happening? She wanted to get up and check, but the memory of the intruder's shadow in her room made her stay put. She would wait until morning. Then she would find out what was in those books. The morning sunlight streaming through the curtains didn't bring Emma the comfort she had hoped for. Her parents were still shaken, and the police officers parked outside the house only reminded her of the danger they were all in. But Emma's thoughts were consumed by the books under her bed. After breakfast, when her parents were busy talking with the police, Emma slipped away to her room. Her hands trembled as she knelt by the bed and pulled out the box where she kept the books Mr. Anderson had given her. They were dusty, their covers worn, but they looked ordinary. Novels, a few history books, and an old leather-bound journal. She opened the journal first. It smelled of old paper, and the handwriting inside was small and neat. At first glance, it appeared to be a collection of notes and random musings. But as she flipped through the pages, she noticed something odd. Certain words were underlined, seemingly at random. Emma grabbed a pen and a piece of paper and began writing down the underlined words. As the list grew, she realized they formed sentences, though they were incomplete and cryptic. One sentence read, "The truth is hidden in plain sight." Another said, "Trust no one." The final sentence she pieced together sent chills down her spine. "They will come for the witness." Emma stared at the paper, her heart pounding. Was the journal a warning? If so, why had Mr. Anderson given it to her? Did he know something was going to happen? Emma's father found her a few minutes later, hunched over the journal. "What are you doing?" he asked, his tone sharp with worry. She hesitated. "I'm just reading one of the books Mr. Anderson gave me." Her father frowned. "Those books can wait. We need to focus on keeping you safe." "But Dad, what if—" "Emma," he interrupted, kneeling in front of her. "I know this is scary, But the police will figure it out. I need you to let them do their job, okay? Emma nodded reluctantly, though she couldn't shake the feeling that the books held answers. She decided not to tell her father about the journal, at least not yet. She needed more time to figure out what it all meant. Later that day, Emma found a moment alone with her best friend, Lily. They sat on the swings in the park, their breath visible in the chilly air. Emma told Lily about the journal and the underlined words. Lily's eyes widened. "That's so creepy," she said. "Do you think Mr. Anderson knew someone was after him?" Emma shrugged. "I don't know, but I think he wanted me to figure something out." "What if you're right?" Lily asked. "What if those books are the reason someone's after you?" Emma hadn't considered that. "You think they're looking for the journal?" "Maybe," Lily said. "But if they are, then it must be important. We should figure out what it says before they come back." Emma glanced around the park nervously. She felt exposed, like someone could be watching them. "I think we should go back to my house," she said. "It's safer there." When they got back, Emma showed Lily the journal and the sentences she had written down. Lily examined the pages closely, her brow furrowed. "This looks like a code," she said, "but it's hard to tell what it means." Emma pulled out another book from the box, a history book about the town's founding. She flipped through it, but nothing seemed unusual. Then Lily pointed at something. "Look at the first letter of each chapter title," she said. Emma scanned the letters, her heart racing. Together, they spelled out, "Key to the Truth." "What does that mean?" Lily asked. "I don't know," Emma said, "but I think we're missing something." That evening, while her parents were distracted with another visit from the police, Emma sneaked back to her room. She felt around the bottom of the box, wondering if there was anything she had overlooked. Her fingers brushed against something rough, a small piece of paper taped to the inside of the box. She pulled it out and unfolded it. Written in Mr. Anderson's handwriting were the words, "Library basement. Look for the blue file." Emma's breath caught. The library. She hadn't been there since Mr. Anderson's death. It was where he had spent most of his free time, volunteering and organizing events. If there was a clue there, it might explain everything. But how was she supposed to get to the library with the police watching her every move? That night, Emma waited until her parents were asleep. She had overheard them discussing the security arrangements with the officers outside, which included keeping patrols near the house all night. Emma felt bad about sneaking out, but she couldn't wait any longer. She had to know what was in the library basement. She packed a small bag with a flashlight and the journal, then climbed out of her window as quietly as she could. The cool night air stung her cheeks as she dropped to the ground and crouched behind the bushes. She waited, watching the beam of a police flashlight sweep across the yard. When it moved away, she darted toward the street, keeping to the shadows. The library was dark when she arrived, its tall windows reflecting the moonlight. Emma crept around to the back entrance, where she knew Mr. Anderson used to keep a spare key hidden in a loose brick. She felt along the wall until her fingers found the small metal key. Inside, the library smelled of old books and dust. The faint hum of the building's heating system was the only sound. Emma used her flashlight to navigate through the aisles until she found the door to the basement. The door creaked as she opened it, the sound echoing in the quiet. She descended the stairs, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The basement was cluttered with boxes and old furniture, but in the far corner, she spotted a cabinet. She opened it, her hands shaking. There, tucked between a stack of old papers, was a blue file folder. Emma opened it and froze. The folder was filled with photographs, notes, and newspaper clippings, all about Marcus Reed's case. But what shocked her most was a photo of a man she didn't recognize. Written in bold letters beneath the photo was a single word, "Guilty." As Emma stared at the photo, she heard footsteps on the stairs behind her. She whipped around, her flashlight shaking in her hand. "Emma," a deep voice said, sending a chill down her spine. "I've been looking for you." Emma's flashlight shook violently in her hand as she pointed it toward the voice. The beam of light revealed a man standing halfway down the stairs, his face partially obscured by shadows. He was tall, dressed in a dark jacket, and his expression was cold and unreadable. I don't know who you are," Emma stammered, her voice trembling. "Leave me alone." The man took another step down the stairs, his boots echoing in the confined space. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his tone calm but menacing. "That file doesn't belong to you." Emma's heart raced as she clutched the blue folder to her chest. She didn't know what to do. She couldn't run past him, and there was no other exit from the basement. "Stay back," she yelled, her voice cracking. The man ignored her, taking another slow step forward. "Listen, kid. You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into. Just give me the file and I'll leave." "No," Emma shouted, surprising even herself with her defiance. "You're trying to hurt me, and I know this is important. I'm not giving it to you." The man's expression darkened. "You don't know what you're messing with," he said, his voice low. "Hand it over, or I'll take it." Emma backed up until she felt the cold concrete wall behind her. She glanced around desperately for something she could use to defend herself. Her flashlight's beam landed on an old metal bookend lying on a nearby table. The man lunged toward her just as Emma grabbed the bookend. She swung it with all her strength, catching him on the side of the head. He stumbled back, clutching his temple and cursing under his breath. Emma didn't wait to see if he recovered. She darted past him, clutching the file, and sprinted up the stairs. Her adrenaline pushed her forward as she ran through the library, heading for the front door. She burst outside into the cold night air, her breath visible in the moonlight. For a moment, she thought she was safe. But then she heard the man's heavy footsteps behind her. He was chasing her. Emma ran as fast as her legs would carry her, her heart pounding in her chest. She weaved through the streets, trying to lose him in the maze of houses and alleyways. Her lungs burned, but she didn't dare slow down. Finally, she spotted a familiar landmark, Lily's house. Emma veered toward it, banging on the door with all her might. "Lily, open up," she yelled, her voice desperate. The porch light flicked on, and a moment later, Lily's dad opened the door, his expression alarmed. "Emma? What's going on?" "Someone's chasing me," Emma gasped. "Please, let me in." He stepped aside quickly, and Emma ran inside just as the man appeared at the end of the street. Lily's dad shut the door and locked it, peering out the window. "Who is that?" he asked. "I don't know," Emma said, clutching the file tightly. "But he's dangerous." A few minutes later, the police arrived, summoned by Lily's dad. Emma sat on the couch, still clutching the file, as she tried to explain what had happened. The officers listened intently, their expressions growing more serious as she described the man in the basement and his attempt to take the file. "Did you recognize him?" one officer asked. Emma shook her head. "No, but he said the file didn't belong to me. He seemed really desperate to get it." The officer glanced at the file in Emma's lap. "Do you mind if we take a look?" Emma hesitated. Part of her didn't want to let the file out of her sight, but she knew she couldn't handle this alone. "Okay," she said softly, handing it over. The officer opened the file and flipped through its contents. His brow furrowed as he examined the photographs and notes. "This is unusual," he muttered. "Where did you find this?" "In the library basement," Emma said. "It was hidden in a cabinet. There was a note from Mr. Anderson that said to look for it." The officer nodded slowly. "We'll need to analyze this. It might have information relevant to Marcus Reed's case." Emma felt a pang of guilt. What if giving them the file meant losing her only lead? "Will I get it back?" she asked. The officer smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry. We'll make copies of everything. If there's anything you need, we'll make sure you have access to it." After the police left, Emma stayed at Lily's house for the rest of the night. She barely slept, her mind racing with questions. Who was the man in the basement? Why was the file so important? And what did it have to do with Marcus Reed? The next morning, Emma's parents picked her up, their faces etched with worry. "You scared us half to death," her mother said as she hugged her tightly. "What were you thinking, sneaking out like that?" Emma explained everything. The journal, the file, the man who had chased her. Her parents listened in stunned silence, their expressions shifting between anger and fear. "We're not letting you out of our sight again," her father said firmly. "You're staying home until this is over." Emma nodded, too exhausted to argue. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. The file was just the beginning, and whoever the man in the basement was, He wasn't going to give up. That afternoon, the police called with an update. The man who broke into the library matches the description of someone we've been tracking for months, the officer said. He's connected to a group we believe may be responsible for framing Marcus Reed. Emma's heart sank. So, Marcus really is innocent? She asked. It's looking that way, the officer said, but proving it won't be easy. The people behind this are dangerous, and they'll do whatever it takes to protect their secrets. Emma hung up the phone, a sense of dread washing over her. She had uncovered a piece of the truth, but it had only made things more complicated and more dangerous. As she sat on her bed, staring at the empty box where the file had been, she realized she couldn't stop now. Mr. Anderson had left her clues for a reason, and she owed it to him, and to Marcus, to see this through. That night, as Emma lay in bed, she heard a noise outside her window. She froze, her heart pounding. Slowly, she turned to look. There, on the glass, was a message scrawled in red paint. Stay out of it. Emma stared at the message scrawled on her window, her stomach twisting in fear. The red letters dripped slightly, like fresh blood, and though it was just paint, the sight made her shudder. She jumped out of bed and ran to her parents' room, banging on the door. Mom, Dad, someone was outside my window, she yelled. Her father opened the door, his face pale with concern. What happened? He asked, pulling her inside. Emma pointed toward her room. There's a message on the window. It says, stay out of it. Her parents exchanged worried looks before her father grabbed a baseball bat and headed to her room. Emma followed close behind, staying behind her mother. When they reached her window, the message was still there, the red letters glaring in the moonlight. Her father stepped closer, examining the outside of the glass. It's paint, he said, his voice tight. But there's no one out there now. Emma's mother gasped. What if it's the same man from the library? Her father didn't answer. He grabbed his phone and called the police, explaining the situation in a hushed, urgent tone. Emma sat on her bed, her arms wrapped around herself, trying to process what had happened. Whoever had left that message wanted her to be scared, and it was working. When the police arrived, they searched the yard and the surrounding area but found no sign of anyone. The officer in charge, a stern woman named Detective Harper, sat down with Emma and her parents in the living room. This is clearly an attempt to intimidate you, Detective Harper said. It's likely connected to the events at the library and the file you found. Emma's father frowned. Why would anyone go to such lengths to scare a child? Because she knows something, Harper replied. Or they think she does. Emma shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I was just trying to help, she said softly. I didn't mean to make things worse. Detective Harper gave her a small, reassuring smile. You're braver than most adults I've met, Emma. But these people are dangerous, and I need you to promise me something. What? Emma asked. I need you to stay away from this investigation, Harper said firmly. Let us handle it. If you find anything else, you come to us right away. No more sneaking out or chasing leads on your own. Understood? Emma nodded reluctantly. Okay, but deep down, she knew she couldn't make that promise. The clues Mr. Anderson had left her were meant for her, and she couldn't just walk away. The next morning, Emma stayed home from school. Her parents were taking no chances, and a patrol car was stationed outside their house all day. Emma spent the morning pacing her room, her mind racing with questions. Why had Mr. Anderson left her the file? What was the group behind Marcus's case trying to hide? And who was the man who had chased her at the library? As she sat on her bed, staring at the empty spot where the file had been, an idea struck her. She still had the journal. Maybe there was something in it that she had missed. Emma grabbed the leather-bound book and began flipping through it again. This time, she paid closer attention to the underlined words and phrases. One page caught her eye. It mentioned a place called Ridgeway Storage. The words Unit 12 were written in the margin, circled several times. Emma's pulse quickened. Was this another clue? She pulled out her phone and searched for Ridgeway Storage. It was only a few miles away, on the outskirts of town. She bit her lip, torn. Detective Harper had told her to stay out of it, but if this was another piece of the puzzle, how could she ignore it? That afternoon, Emma called Lily and told her about the storage unit. Are you seriously thinking about going there? Lily asked, her voice a mix of excitement and worry. I have to, Emma said. What if there's something important there? Something that could help Marcus? Lily hesitated. Okay, but I'm coming with you. There's no way you're doing this alone. Emma smiled, relieved. Thanks, Lily. Meet me at the park in an hour. The two girls met at the park and rode their bikes to Ridgeway Storage. The facility was quiet, with rows of identical storage units stretching into the distance. A bored-looking man sat in a small office near the entrance, barely glancing at them as they walked past. Emma and Lily found Unit 12 easily. It was tucked in the middle of the second row. Emma's heart raced as she pulled on the metal latch, but it was locked. What now? Lily whispered. Emma glanced around and spotted a rusty crowbar leaning against a nearby dumpster. She grabbed it and wedged it under the latch, using all her strength to pry it open. The lock snapped with a loud crack. Inside, the unit was dark and smelled of damp metal. Emma clicked on her flashlight, revealing a cluttered space filled with boxes, old furniture, and random equipment. She and Lily started searching, opening boxes and sifting through papers. After a few minutes, Emma found something unusual, a small safe hidden under a pile of blankets. It was locked, but a keyhole suggested it could be opened with the right key. Do you think Mr. Anderson left this here? Lily asked, peering over Emma's shoulder. Maybe, Emma said, but we need the key. As they continued searching, Emma noticed a framed photo lying face down on a nearby shelf. She picked it up and turned it over. It was a picture of Mr. Anderson standing next to a man she didn't recognize. The man was smiling, but there was something unsettling about his expression. Who's that? Lily asked, pointing to the man in the photo. I don't know, Emma said, but I've seen him before. Her stomach sank as she realized where. It was the same man whose picture had been in the blue file, the one labeled guilty. Before she could say anything else, a loud bang echoed through the storage unit. The girls froze, their eyes darting toward the entrance. Footsteps. Someone was outside. Emma's heart raced as she grabbed Lily's hand. We need to hide, she whispered. They crouched behind a stack of boxes, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps grew louder, and then a voice called out. I know you're in here, the man said, his tone cold and mocking. You can't hide forever. Emma gripped Lily's hand tighter, her mind racing. They were trapped, and whoever was outside wasn't going to leave without finding them. Emma's heart pounded in her ears as she and Lily huddled behind the boxes. The man's footsteps echoed through the storage unit, slow and deliberate. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, growing closer with every step. I don't want to hurt you, the man called out, his voice dripping with false kindness. Just give me what I'm looking for, and we can forget all about this. Lily squeezed Emma's hand, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Emma put a finger to her lips, silently pleading with her friend to stay quiet. She peeked through a small gap between the boxes, her eyes locking on the man. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark jacket blending into the shadows. His face was partially obscured by the brim of a baseball cap, but she could see the glint of determination in his eyes. The man stopped in the center of the storage unit, his flashlight sweeping over the shelves and furniture. He crouched down to inspect a pile of papers near the safe. You're just kids, he muttered. You don't know what you're messing with. Emma bit her lip, her mind racing. She had to think of a way out. They couldn't stay hidden forever, and the man was blocking the only exit. Her eyes darted around the unit, searching for anything they could use to their advantage. That's when she saw it. A stack of metal pipes leaning against the wall a few feet away. If she could knock them over, it might create enough noise to distract the man and give them a chance to escape. She leaned close to Lily and whispered, When I say go, run to the door. Lily's eyes widened. What about you? I'll be right behind you, Emma promised, though her voice wavered slightly. Before Lily could protest, Emma picked up a small wrench from the floor and threw it toward the pipes. The wrench clanged against the metal, sending the entire stack crashing to the ground with a deafening noise. The man spun around, his flashlight jerking toward the sound. What the? Go, Emma hissed, grabbing Lily's hand and pulling her to her feet. The two girls bolted for the door, their footsteps pounding against the concrete floor. The man shouted something behind them, but Emma didn't stop to listen. She pushed Lily out the door first, then followed, slamming it shut behind them. Outside, the cool night air hit them like a wave, but they didn't slow down. They jumped on their bikes and pedaled as fast as they could, their legs burning with the effort. Emma glanced over her shoulder and saw the man burst out of the storage unit, his flashlight bobbing wildly as he ran after them. "Faster!" Emma yelled, her voice hoarse with panic. The man shouted something, but the words were lost in the wind. Emma focused on the road ahead, her heart racing as they weaved through the dark streets. Eventually, the storage facility disappeared behind them, and the man's shouts faded into silence. When they finally stopped, they were several blocks away, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. They leaned against a street lamp, their bikes propped up beside them. "Do you think he's still following us?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. Emma shook her head, though she wasn't entirely sure. "I don't think so. I think we lost him." Lily collapsed onto the curb, burying her face in her hands. "This is insane. We could have died in there." Emma sat down beside her, the adrenaline slowly draining from her body. "I know," she said quietly, "but we found something important. That's safe. It has to mean something." Lily looked up at her, her eyes wide. "You want to go back, don't you?" Emma hesitated. She did want to go back, but not without a plan. "Not tonight," she said. "But we can't just ignore this. Mr. Anderson left us clues for a reason." "Us?" Lily asked, raising an eyebrow. Emma smiled faintly. "Okay, maybe just me. But I can't do this alone." Lily sighed. "Fine, but next time, we're bringing someone who can actually help. Like the police." Emma nodded. "Deal." The next morning, Emma reviewed everything they had found so far. She spread the journal, the photo of Mr. Anderson and the man, and the notes she had taken across her bed. The photo haunted her. There was something about the man's face that unsettled her, even though she couldn't quite explain why. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on her door. Her father stepped inside, his expression unreadable. "Can we talk?" he asked. Emma nodded, motioning for him to sit on the edge of her bed. Her father sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know you're trying to help, and I know how much Mr. Anderson meant to you. But this is getting dangerous. That man from the storage unit could have hurt you." "I know," Emma said quietly, "but he didn't. And I think we're close to figuring out what really happened to Mr. Anderson." Her father frowned. "What do you mean?" Emma hesitated, then decided to tell him about the safe. "There's something in it, something important. I think it's connected to Marcus's case." Her father's expression softened. "Emma, I just want you to be safe. Let me help you." Emma looked at him, surprised. "You believe me?" He nodded. "You're a lot like your mother, stubborn, but usually right. If you think this is worth pursuing, then I'm with you. But we're doing it the right way this time." Emma felt a surge of relief. "Okay," she said, "but we have to move fast. I think the man who chased us is after the same thing." Her father's jaw tightened. "Then we'll find it before he does." Later that night, Emma, her father, and Detective Harper met to discuss their plan. Harper was skeptical at first but agreed to accompany them to the storage unit. "This is highly irregular," she said, loading her service weapon. "But if there's something in that safe, we need to know." As they drove to the storage facility, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every passing car and shadowy figure on the sidewalk made her skin crawl. She clutched the journal tightly, praying that whatever they found in the safe would finally give them the answers they needed. When they arrived, the facility was eerily quiet. Harper led the way, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. Emma stayed close to her father, her eyes darting around nervously. When they reached Unit 12, Harper used a bolt cutter to remove the damaged lock. The door creaked open, revealing the cluttered interior. "Stay behind me," Harper said, stepping inside with her gun drawn. Emma and her father followed, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. They moved quickly to the safe, which was still in its place under the blankets. Harper inspected it, then pulled out a small toolkit. "This might take a minute," she said, kneeling in front of the safe. Emma held her breath as Harper worked, the tension in the room thick. Finally, with a soft click, the safe popped open. Inside was a stack of documents, neatly bound together. Harper flipped through them, her eyes narrowing. "These are financial records," she said. "Bank transfers, property deeds. And look at this." She held up a page with several names listed. Emma's blood ran cold when she saw the last name on the list. Emma Clark. "What does this mean?" her father asked, his voice tight with fear. Before Harper could answer, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed behind them. They turned just in time to see the man from the night before step into the unit, his face twisted in anger. "Put the papers down," he growled, leveling a gun at them. Emma froze, her heart pounding as the man pointed the gun directly at Detective Harper. The air in the storage unit was suffocating, the tension so thick it felt like the walls were closing in. Harper slowly raised her hands, the stack of documents still clutched in her left hand. "Let's talk about this," Harper said calmly, her voice steady despite the clear danger. "You don't have to do this." The man's eyes darted between Harper and Emma's father, his hand gripping the gun tightly. "You shouldn't have opened that safe," he snarled. "You don't know what you've gotten yourselves into." Emma's father stepped in front of her protectively. "Whatever this is, it doesn't involve my daughter," he said firmly. "Let her go." The man scoffed. "Doesn't involve her? She's the reason we're here." That little girl stuck her nose where it didn't belong. Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why did you frame Marcus?" The man's expression darkened. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" he sneered. "You don't understand the bigger picture." "Then explain it to me," Harper said, her voice calm but authoritative. "Help me understand." The man hesitated, his grip on the gun faltering for a split second. "This was never supposed to be messy," he muttered. "Anderson, he found something he shouldn't have. He threatened to go public, so we handled it." Emma's eyes widened. "You killed him?" The man didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said it all. "And Marcus?" Harper pressed. "Why frame him?" The man laughed bitterly. "He was easy. A nobody with a record. The kind of guy people already suspect. It tied everything up neatly. Until her." He glared at Emma. "Anderson left her just enough breadcrumbs to unravel everything." Harper lowered her hands slightly, keeping her tone neutral. "It's not too late to walk away from this. Put the gun down and we'll work this out." The man shook his head. "You don't get it. There's no walking away. If I don't handle this, they'll handle me." Emma's father clenched his fists. "You're not hurting my daughter." The man raised the gun higher, his eyes narrowing. "You don't have a choice." In that moment, Harper moved. With lightning speed, she lunged toward the man, grabbing the barrel of the gun and twisting it away. A deafening shot rang out, and Emma screamed, ducking behind a stack of boxes. Harper and the man struggled, the gun clattering to the ground as they fought for control. Emma's father pulled her further into the shadows, shielding her as chaos erupted. Harper landed a solid punch to the man's face, but he was strong and desperate. He shoved her against a shelf, sending boxes crashing to the ground. Emma peeked out from her hiding spot, her eyes darting to the gun lying on the floor. It was just a few feet away. She glanced at her father, who was focused on protecting her, and made a split-second decision. Before she could second-guess herself, Emma darted out of the shadows and grabbed the gun. The weight of it surprised her, but she gripped it tightly, her hands trembling. "Emma!" "No!" her father yelled, but it was too late. The man turned just as she aimed the gun at him. His eyes widened in surprise. For a moment, neither of them moved. "Drop it!" Emma shouted, her voice shaky but loud. The man smirked. "You don't even know how to use that." "Try me," she said, her finger hovering over the trigger. Harper, recovering from the fight, stood slowly and edged closer to the man. "Emma, put it down," she said gently. "I've got this." Emma hesitated, her hands trembling. The man saw his opening and lunged toward her. Before he could reach her, Harper tackled him to the ground, pinning him with a knee to his back. Emma's father rushed over, taking the gun from her hands. "Emma, are you okay?" he asked, his voice trembling. She nodded, her knees weak. I didn't know what else to do." "You did great," Harper said, panting as she cuffed the man's hands behind his back. "But next time, leave the heroics to me." The police arrived minutes later, taking the man into custody. Harper handed over the documents from the safe, instructing the officers to secure them as evidence. Emma sat on the curb outside the storage facility, wrapped in her father's jacket, her mind racing. "Is it over?" she asked softly. Harper crouched in front of her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We've got him, and we've got the documents to prove what he and his group did. But this is just the start. There are others involved, and we need to take them down." Emma nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it would ever truly be over. She had seen too much, learned too much. The web of lies and danger was bigger than she had ever imagined. Later that night, back at home, Emma sat on her bed, staring at the journal. She traced her fingers over the worn leather cover, wondering if Mr. Anderson had known how much his clues would cost her. Her father knocked softly on the door and stepped inside. "Hey," he said, sitting beside her. "You okay?" Emma nodded, though tears welled in her eyes. I feel like it's my fault. If I hadn't—" "Stop," her father said firmly. "You were brave, Emma. You did what you thought was right, and because of you, Marcus might finally get justice." Emma leaned against him, her tears spilling over. "I just want it all to stop." Her father wrapped an arm around her. "It will. I promise." But even as he said the words, Emma felt a lingering unease. Somewhere out there, others were still pulling the strings, and she wasn't sure she could trust the fight to end here. That night, as she lay in bed, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Her blood ran cold as she read the words. "This isn't over, Emma." Emma sat frozen in bed, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. The message blinked on the screen. "This isn't over, Emma." Her heart skipped a beat, and a shiver ran down her spine. She had expected this moment, the calm before the storm, but part of her had hoped, desperately, that this nightmare was finally behind her. She stared at the message for a long time, her mind racing. Who could it be? Was it the same people who had framed Marcus? Or was it someone else, someone even more dangerous? She didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't let fear control her. No matter how much she wanted to ignore it, to pretend everything was normal, she couldn't. The truth was out there, buried in the secrets of the past, and it was her responsibility to see it through. The next morning, Emma met with Detective Harper and her father. They sat around the kitchen table, a pile of documents between them. The photo of the man with Mr. Anderson was now in the hands of the police, and the rest of the evidence from the storage unit had been analyzed. Things were moving in the right direction. "We've identified the rest of the group," Harper said, her voice tired but resolute. "They're connected to a series of fraudulent activities. We've got enough to bring them down." Emma's father smiled at her. "You did this. You gave us the key to everything." Emma smiled weakly, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the text message. But what if there's more? What if there are still people out there, still pulling the strings? Harper looked at her seriously. "There might be, but we're not letting them get away. We're watching every move." Emma nodded, grateful for the reassurance, but the doubt still lingered. She couldn't help but wonder if this was just the beginning of something much larger. What if the people behind this were always one step ahead? As days passed, Emma started to feel more at ease. The police had arrested several members of the group, and Marcus was released from custody after a thorough investigation cleared him of any wrongdoing. The truth was finally coming to light, and with it, a sense of justice. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that her life had changed forever. She had learned things that a child shouldn't have to know, faced fears that most people could only imagine. And in doing so, she had become something she wasn't sure she was ready to be, a witness to the truth, no matter how dangerous it was. Weeks later, the case against the group was brought to trial. Emma sat in the courtroom, her family by her side. She watched as the people responsible for Mr. Anderson's death, for the lies and the betrayal, were led away in handcuffs. It wasn't over yet, but it was close. Justice had been served. The man who had chased Emma in the storage unit was sentenced to life in prison, along with the others who had been involved in the conspiracy. As the courtroom emptied, Emma stood outside, her gaze lingering on the courthouse steps. She had done it. She had helped uncover the truth, and in doing so, had given justice to a man who had once been like a second father to her. It hadn't been easy, and there were still questions left unanswered, but Emma knew that whatever came next, she would face it head-on. And maybe, just maybe, the storm was finally over. As she walked home with her parents, the weight on her shoulders seemed a little lighter. The text message, the fear, all of it felt like it was slowly fading away. But even as she stepped into the comfort of her home, a small part of her remained vigilant. Because the world was full of secrets, and Emma knew that if she ever wanted to uncover the next truth, she would have to keep searching, no matter where it led. And so, the story ended, for now.